Oh, okay. This is one of the fastest growing modes of transportation in our cities today. You might know it as Mobi, Lime, Bixi, City Bike, Bird, Spin, Divvy, Indigo, Metro Bike, or a number of other names, but they all fall under an overarching category called shared micromobility. No, we have to come up with a better name than that. These are services that provide lightweight vehicles like bikes and scooters for rent throughout the city, whether it's picking one up at a dock station or picking one off the sidewalk. And these small vehicles are having a big impact. In 2010, people across North America took about 3.7 million trips on these systems. By 2023, that number had exploded to 157 million. In the US, that's partially thanks to the rise of scooter shares. But in Canada, that growth is actually being driven by docked Bikeshares. One of the fastest growing systems on the continent is Bikeshare Toronto. Its ridership has doubled since the pandemic and continues to break records every year. In fact, Canada is actually home to one of the top bike-sharing systems on the planet, Bixi, in Montreal. The dock stations are everywhere, they're dirt cheap to rent, and the city itself has a generous network of protected bike lanes crisscrossing the city. This is my first traffic jam. Put that all together, and Bixi becomes one of the cheapest, most affordable, and most enjoyable ways to get around town. This bike share saw a whopping 13 million trips last year, which is second only to New York. But this is probably not your experience, because frankly, systems like Bixi are the exception, not the norm. The top 5 bike-sharing systems account for over 75% of all bike-sharing trips across North America. So what's really going on here is that a handful of cities are finding a ton of success with bike-share, while most really struggle to provide this service. For the rest of us Anglophones, shared bikes and scooters are often expensive, messy, and only available in certain areas. The services themselves can be unreliable, with companies changing every other year or even shutting down. That difference is what I want to get into for this video. Why are bike shares and scooter shares breaking records in some cities and literally going bankrupt in others? And there's the lawnmowers. Let's get out of here. To understand what's going on, I started with my hometown of Vancouver. Yes, Vancouver, the self-proclaimed
greenest city in the world.
Vancouver, the greenest city in the world.
And the only city in Canada that doesn't turn into a frozen hellhole in the winter. I always felt that we would have a killer bike share. Well, Vancouver's bike share is Mobi. And I mean, Mobi's okay, but it's nowhere near the level of Toronto and Montreal. This is Mobi's network. 260 stations with 2,600 bikes. Pretty good for getting around downtown Vancouver, but not much more beyond that. Compare that to Bikeshare Toronto. Over 1,000 stations with over 10,000 bikes that basically cover the entire city. Or Montreal's Bixi. Over 1,000 stations with over 12,000 bikes with a service area that goes into neighboring towns like Laval, Longueuil. Now, some of you may be thinking, that was an apples to oranges comparison. So let's talk about Lime. So dumb. Vancouver Scooter Share has a modest 600 vehicles and the unique distinction of being the only scooter share so far with docks. But there's one really annoying feature. When you open the app, you'll notice that there are all these areas highlighted in red that you can't go to, which is basically most of the city. If you try, the scooter just dies. And then there's the price. Mobi at 29 cents a minute is 30% more expensive than Bixi and more than twice as expensive as Toronto's bike share. But the real sticker shock comes with the electric vehicles. Mobi's e-bikes and Lime's scooters cost 39 cents a minute to ride, almost double that of Toronto's e-bikes. At that price, taking a scooter or an e-bike is comparable to taking an Uber. Well, I forgot to make sure the mic was recording, so let me just tell you what's going on here. I'm taking a Lime scooter to my office, and Justin, my videographer, is taking an Uber. We'll compare the cost afterwards. Let's do this. Oh, there he is. A 21-minute trip cost me $10.57. Justin, your trip cost pre-tip, it was $11.69. So why is that? Why is bikeshare so affordable and seemingly everywhere in some cities, and almost as expensive as taking a literal car in others? Well, there's something happening behind the scenes here. And to understand it, we first have to understand the business model of bikeshares and scooter shares. Let's say you want to start a bike share. Well, in some ways, it's like any other business. There are costs and revenues. It costs money to buy equipment, like bikes and docks. These are called capital costs. But once you have this equipment, it also costs money to run the system, repairing bikes and redistributing them to make sure that each dock station has bikes available. These are called operating costs. To recover those costs, your bike share of course needs to charge fees to rent its vehicles. That said, these are rarely enough to cover all your costs. Many bike shares also rely on sponsorships, advertising, government subsidies, or a combination of all three to fully cover their costs. But unlike your typical business, a bike share also needs to create a contract with the city. This is a service that uses public roads and public parking spaces, so you need to make an agreement with the city for how this all works. This can include rules for where the vehicles can go, where they can be parked, how fast they can go, and whether the city will subsidize the service or, on the flip side, collect fees from it. And this contract is one of the most important factors in a bike share or scooter share's success. Let's take a look back at Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver's bike shares. On the surface, they're all pretty similar systems, but dive into their contracts, and it's a completely different story. Montreal's Bixi system is owned by the local government and operated by Bixi Montreal, a nonprofit organization. According to Bixi, 14% of its operating costs are covered by the city, and the rest is covered through advertising and user fees. But get this, 100% of its capital expenses are paid for by the local government, not Bixi. That means anytime Bixi needs to add a new dock or buy new bikes, it's the government who foots the bill. Bikeshare Toronto is owned by the Toronto Parking Authority, which owns and collects parking fees from over 60,000 parking spaces across the city. That parking revenue helps subsidize 20% of the cost of its bikeshare operations. Yes, in Toronto, cars subsidize cycling. And importantly, the City of Toronto subsidizes 100% of the bikeshare's capital costs. Any new bike or dock is paid for by the local government. Are you noticing a pattern here? Well, let's take a look at Vancouver. Mobi is owned by a local company called Vancouver Bikeshare Incorporated. Its contract with the local government included a one-time startup grant of $5 million in 2016, but it's pretty much been expected to run on its own ever since. In other words, no operating subsidies. Today, Mobi is funded 100% from user fees and sponsorships. On top of that, Mobi's contract requires it to pay the government for using the city's parking spaces for its docks, about $400,000 a year. On top of that, Mobi is required to have an equity program, which offers a deeply discounted annual pass for low-income residents and seniors across the city. That in itself isn't a bad thing, but it costs Mobi about another $500,000 a year. All of these costs need to be paid through user fees and sponsorships. And oddly enough, the City of Vancouver takes great pains to ensure that Mobi does not compete with local bike rental shops, because God forbid a bike rental company competes with other bike rental companies. Then there's Lime. Lime is one of the largest scooter share companies in the world, backed by Silicon Valley startups like Uber. The details of their contract with the City of Vancouver are murky. But we do know that Lime pays a fee to the city for each trip, and we can probably assume that their agreement includes these restrictions on where their scooters can go. According to a city report, Lime is expected to operate as a revenue-neutral or revenue-generating program for the city. So in summary, in Montreal and Toronto, governments have given their bike shares a huge boost by subsidizing their operating costs and paying for equipment, which in turn allows these services to grow quickly and cost very little to use. But here in Vancouver, it's the complete opposite. Our government collects fees from its shared micromobility services and places restrictions on how it operates. So it's kind of no wonder that these services cost more and have much less money to expand or improve their services. So that brings me to another question. Why? Why do some cities have contracts to subsidize and improve their bike share systems, while other cities have contracts to collect taxes and stunt their growth? Well, the messy landscape of shared micromobility today is the result of a very messy history behind shared micromobility itself. The first major bike shares were docked systems spearheaded by progressive governments and community organizations. They were seen as a tool to encourage more people to cycle while reducing traffic and pollution. To create these services, governments subsidized them. In Montreal, the city government spent $15 million developing its Bixi system. And in Vancouver, Mobi received a $5 million grant from the city when it first started. Governments wanted these systems to exist and subsidized them.
Have you seen they have the new bikes.
That you can rent?
The city bikes you can rent.
Yeah, they're like, okay, we're going to go out now. Here we go. And New Yorkers are going, get the off that bike.
But then everything changed in the mid-2010s when, for some reason, Silicon Valley decided that the next big money-making technology wasn't AI or crypto, but sharing bikes and scooters. Yes, this decade saw literally billions of dollars invested into dozens of shared micromobility startups like Ofo, Mobike, Jump, Lime, Bird, Spin, and dozens of other tech companies. Even the original Razor scooters got into the game with Razor Share. These new companies had a radically different approach from the bike shares that came before them. They didn't have docks, they used cheaper vehicles like scooters, and they often used a business strategy that could only be described as ask forgiveness, not permission.
A company named Bird just dropped off about 200 of its electric scooters in San Francisco.
No contracts, no permissions, just dropping their bikes and scooters off on the sidewalk overnight and seeing what happens. And what happened?
Had a wild scene on their hand, lost control and crashed into a woman.
Potential to make the batteries smolder or catch fire.
We will confiscate those bikes. We will impound those bikes. We will sell those bikes.
Cities perceived this to be a pretty rude gesture and began to crack down on these services, issuing cease and desist letters, impounding vehicles, and forcing these companies to sign contracts to accept regulations. This included fees and taxes, curfews for when you could ride these vehicles, restrictions on where you could go, and did I mention fees and taxes? Now, as long as there was a continuous flow of venture capital money coming in, these new fees and restrictions weren't a huge issue. But when that money inevitably dried up and moved on to the next unicorn, a lot of these companies realized that they had overpromised and were burning through money faster than a lithium battery fire. As a result, many of these companies pulled their services from cities, and several even declared bankruptcy. And the ones that stuck around raised their prices, like a lot. When Lime first launched in Seattle in 2017, their bikes cost $1 for a half-hour trip. Today, it's 50 cents a minute. Today, the dust is still settling from all this messy history, and the result is that cities are kind of being pulled in two different directions when it comes to shared bikes and scooters. On one hand, many see shared micromobility as an important public service. They help people move around the city quickly and cheaply while also reducing traffic and pollution. From this perspective, shared bikes and scooters should be treated like a form of public transit, something that's affordable, reliable, and accessible to the everyday commuter. That likely means subsidizing it, or at the very least not charging it extra fees. But on the other hand, there's a more skeptical view. Others argue that private companies should provide these services without public subsidy, and even pay extra fees to the city for the privilege of doing so. And after the messy rollout of scooter shares, many also see these vehicles as a dangerous liability, something that needs to be strictly contained and regulated. In this view, bike shares and scooter shares are kind of like Uber or Lyft, a premium service meant for occasional trips and tourists, not something most people would rely on every day. Every city today is figuring out where they stand between either of these two perspectives, and the view they choose ends up having a huge influence on how your scooter share or bike share system works and feels on the ground. Now, there is no settled resolution to this debate yet, but I think there's one thing we can be sure of. The cost and availability of your bike share or scooter share wasn't an accident. It was a choice. I want to talk about one more issue around bike share. I want to talk about one more issue around bike share that's specific to Metro Vancouver. Vancouver's metro area is made up of 21 different municipalities, and each one has a unique contract with a shared micromobility company. You have Moby and Lime in Vancouver, Evolve in Burnaby's SFU campus, Lime in New Westminster, and Bird in Surrey. You see the problem here? This is a messy and disjointed network, but it's also a bit of a missed opportunity. One of the most promising benefits of shared micromobility is that it can work hand in hand with a city's public transit system. High-frequency buses and trains can only reach so many people, but bike shares and scooter shares can help fill these gaps. Imagine taking a bike share to your local subway, taking a train to another part of town, and then taking a bike share again on the other end. That's the promise of a shared micromobility system that's purposely integrated into a city's public transit network. But Metro Vancouver's disjointed patchwork of different services, each with their own apps, their own vehicles, and their own memberships, makes that kind of trip really complicated and expensive. Making shared micromobility services a bit more consistent across Metro Vancouver's 21 municipalities is one idea that Hub Cycling is advocating for. They're a nonprofit organization dedicated to growing and supporting cycling here in Metro Vancouver, and the sponsor of this video. They're asking municipalities here to coordinate on a regional shared micromobility service that works across municipal boundaries, operates under consistent rules, provides affordable and equitable access to all people who live, work, and play in the region, and connects directly with TransLink's Compass card so that people can ride a bike, scooter, bus, or SkyTrain all with one pass. And it's not just Hub Cycling who's interested in this idea. TransLink, Metro Vancouver's transportation agency, is currently studying the potential for a region-wide shared micromobility service. So far, it seems like the main challenge is just convincing local governments that they should coordinate around these services rather than creating their own special snowflake contracts with different companies, which is already happening to some extent. Across the Burrard Inlet, the City of North Vancouver and the District of North Vancouver have worked together to offer one bike share service, Evolve, which is owned by the car share service Evo. Because of that, you can use the same app to unlock a shared bike or a shared car in either of these two municipalities. Little conveniences like these can really add up to make it that much easier to get around your city. So if you're passionate about this idea, talk to your local politician about talking to each other. If you're interested in Hub Cycling's work, check out bikehub.ca. And if you can think of a better term than shared micromobility, please let me know in the comments.